I should have been in Manhattan for another 3 days, wrapping up a client pitch that was supposed to drag through the weekend. But an unexpected last-minute cancellation sent me onto the early evening train back to Connecticut, the rails humming like a secret I wasn't meant to uncover. The September air wrapped around me when I stepped off the platform, cool and sharp, carrying the faint smell of wood smoke from someone's backyard. I loosened the silk scarf at my neck, thinking only of a quiet night with a glass of wine and the comfort of my own bed. But when I pushed open the front door of my parents' colonial, the sound that greeted me wasn't the hush of an empty house. It was the scrape of cardboard flaps, the muted rip of packing tape, and my mother's voice, soft but brisk, directing someone to fold the sweaters neatly. She won't mind. I froze in the doorway, my leather heels sinking into the welcome mat. There, in the living room, stood my father, sleeves rolled up, carefully sliding my framed photographs into bubble wrap. Beside him, my mother bent over an open box, my box, nestled with the very books I'd lined on my childhood shelves. My heart pounded, a sharp, almost metallic beat. What are you doing?" They both startled, guilty as teenagers caught sneaking out. My mother straightened, tape dispenser dangling from her hand. "Darcy, you're home early." I clutched my scarf tighter. Apparently, you're packing up my life." I was 21 the night everything cracked. Back then, I still smelled faintly of the jasmine lotion my roommate teased me for buying in bulk, and I still believed that being good was the only way to keep my parents' love. It started with a single sheet of paper, my acceptance letter to the graduate design program in Chicago, spread like contraband across my comforter. I'd waited until midnight to open it, listening for the creak of the upstairs hallway. But they found it first. When I came home from my late shift at the campus cafe, my mother was standing in the doorway of my bedroom, the letter trembling between her fingers. Dad sat on the edge of my bed, jaw tight, eyes fixed on the beige carpet as if it had betrayed him too. "Madison," Mom began, my name sharp as a snapped branch. "You applied without telling us?" I tried to steady my voice. I wanted to be sure before You wanted to hide it, Dad cut in. "Chicago? That's halfway across the country. How do you expect to pay for that? How do you expect us to explain this to everyone?" Their words came at me like pellets of ice, small, stinging, relentless. I felt the familiar lump swell in my throat, the kind that always appeared when I needed to be brave. "You don't need another degree," Mom said, softer now but somehow crueler. "We talked about staying close, maybe teaching at the local school. Stability, Madison. That's what matters." I gripped the doorknob until the metal bit into my palm. "Stability isn't the same as happiness," I whispered. Dad's chair screeched against the floor as he stood. "You're making a mistake. And if you walk out on this family for some design dream, don't expect us to clean up after you when it fails." Something inside me, some fragile glass, shattered. That night, after they went to bed, I sat at my desk with shaking hands and packed the only gift I'd ever kept from Grandma Jo, a silver fountain pen she'd given me when I was 12. "Write your own story," she'd said, pressing it into my palm, "even if no one else understands the plot." By sunrise, I had 3 suitcases zipped and waiting by the door. I left a note, just a single line, "I need to try." The pen rested in my coat pocket, warm against my heart as the taxi pulled away. The city felt like a second skin the first year I moved here, tight in all the wrong places, itchy, impossible to break in. But I refused to shut it. Rent was a nightmare. My first apartment was barely larger than the walk-in closet back home, and the radiator hissed like a bitter old neighbor. Still, every night I pressed my palms together in the dark and whispered the same promise: I will not go back. Days blurred into 12-hour shifts at the downtown marketing agency. At first, they only trusted me with mindless tasks, organizing spreadsheets, fetching coffee that wasn't even for me. But I listened. I watched how the senior strategists presented their ideas, how they turned numbers into stories. I stayed late, memorizing slides, reworking proposals nobody asked me to touch. When the agency's biggest client suddenly needed a full campaign in under a week, I slid a concept deck onto my manager's desk. He stared at me as if I'd trespassed on sacred ground, but the client loved it. My name wasn't on the final presentation, but the senior partner, a sharp-eyed woman named Marissa Blake, sought me out afterward. "You've got grit," she said, handing me her card. "Don't waste it hiding behind other people's credits." Marissa became the first person in years who looked at me without measuring what I'd lost. She offered quiet mentorship, book recommendations, introductions at networking events, advice that sounded almost like friendship. She was the one who told me to stop dressing like I was apologizing. I still remember the weight of the soft gray blazer she helped me pick out, the way it settled on my shoulders like permission. Money remained tight, but small victories began to stack up. A side project I pitched turned into a freelance retainer. A local startup offered to pay triple my agency rate for brand strategy after seeing my work. I saved every spare dollar, turning down weekend brunches and late-night cocktails, funneling everything into a business account I didn't dare tell my parents about. For 2 years, I lived a double life. Emily from home in their eyes, still fragile and trying to figure things out, and me, the quiet architect of something entirely my own. Social media was my camouflage. Photos of coffee cups, city sunsets, nothing that hinted at the contracts piling up in my inbox. The night my LLC papers arrived, I poured a single glass of cheap champagne and toasted the silence of my studio apartment. No one called to celebrate, no one knew. And that secrecy, once a shield, began to feel like power. I thought of Aunt Lydia's charm bracelet, the one she'd pressed into my hand before I left home, its tiny silver heart winking with a stubborn kind of hope. I wore it every day, a quiet reminder that someone, somewhere, had always believed I could build a life that belonged only to me. By the time my 3rd year in the city began, I wasn't just surviving. I was leading pitches, signing clients, running a boutique agency that bore no one's name but my own. And still, back home, they believed I was barely making rent. I didn't plan a grand entrance. When I pushed open the glass door to my own loft that afternoon, the autumn light spilling through the giant windows did all the work for me. My mother and father froze mid-motion, my mother still gripping a roll of bubble wrap, my father's hand inside one of my desk drawers. "Emily," my mother started, but caught herself. She still sometimes tripped on my name like it belonged to the girl they'd tried to mold, not the woman standing in front of them. "It's Chloe, remember?" I said evenly, shrugging off my trench coat. The silk lining whispered against my skin as I laid it across the back of the leather chair. The scent of fresh espresso from the kitchen cut through the crisp, dry air. Dad blinked, his face tightening. "We thought you'd be at the office till 8. We were just helping you pack. That studio you found." I stepped farther into the room, the quiet click of my heels on the polished oak floors a metronome of control. "The studio I found?" I repeated, letting the words hang. "Interesting. Because I never mentioned moving to a studio." My mother glanced at my father. "We only wanted to get you settled. It's more practical. You've been living beyond." "Beyond what?" I cut in, my voice still gentle but no longer soft. I gestured toward the walls, framed photographs from my travels, original canvases by local artists, the custom bookshelves lined with the first editions I'd hunted down over the years. The late afternoon sun turned the copper edges of the frames into a slow burn. "You've both assumed, all these years, that I'm barely keeping afloat. That every choice I made after walking out of that house was a mistake waiting to happen." I moved toward the wide window, Manhattan's skyline glowing behind me like a living mural. "You never asked. You just decided." Dad's jaw worked like he was grinding down words too sharp to swallow. "You've always been stubborn. We thought you'd come to your senses eventually." I turned, letting the city's light silhouette me. "Come to my senses?" My laugh was quiet, but it sliced through the room. "While you were waiting for me to fail, I built something you can't even picture." I crossed to the sleek marble island where my laptop sat open. With a quick tap, the screen bloomed with charts and numbers, contracts from my design firm, quarterly reports, the 7-figure balance that reflected years of quiet, relentless work. Mom stepped closer, her voice a whisper. "Chloe, what is all this?" "My company. I said simply. Carter and Row Interiors. I started it from my tiny walk-up, remember? The one you said was a temporary rebellion. We just signed our biggest deal yet, a chain of luxury hotels across the coast. Their eyes darted across the screen, then back to me. Shock flickered, then something else, an ache I recognized but refused to soothe. I kept it quiet, I continued, because every time I shared a dream, you measured it against your own fears. So I stopped giving you the ruler. Silence swelled until even the city traffic below seemed to hold its breath. My father lowered the drawer he'd been rifling through. My mother set the bubble wrap on the counter as if it suddenly weighed too much. I met their gaze, one parent at a time. You came here to pack me into a smaller life. But this, I swept a hand toward the sun-washed loft, the skyline, the evidence of my success. This is the life I chose. And it's not shrinking for anyone. For a long beat, they only stared, faces caught between pride and the sting of being wrong. And for the first time in years, I let the silence stand, thick and undeniable, like the city itself. I let the silence stretch until it turned almost physical, like a curtain of static between us. Dad finally cleared his throat, the same nervous tick I'd memorized from childhood. So, he began, voice dry, this is your place? I tilted my head slightly, letting my gaze travel from my father to my mother. My place. The mahogany shelves, the soft leather couch, the glass wall that framed the city skyline like a painting, it all belonged to me. Yes, I said evenly. This is where all those late nights you worried about brought me. Mom's eyes darted toward the gleaming awards on the sideboard. We didn't know. I inhaled slowly, steadying the tremor in my chest. The old Emily, the one they'd tried to shrink into that tiny studio, would have rushed to comfort them. But I wasn't her anymore. You didn't ask, I replied. They flinched, and for a heartbeat, the only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioner. I'm not here to shame you, I continued, softening my tone just a fraction. But if we're going to have a relationship again, things have to change. Dad frowned. Change? Yes. I stepped closer, folding my arms, not defensively, but in the quiet confidence I'd fought to earn. First, you have to stop deciding what's best for me without asking me. My life isn't a project for you to manage. Mom's chin trembled. We thought we were helping. You weren't, I interrupted gently. You were afraid. Afraid that I might fail if I did things my way. But failure was mine to risk. Dad lowered his eyes. And your conditions? I took a breath, the scent of my jasmine candle anchoring me. Respect. Real respect. You listen when I speak. You don't dismiss my choices because they don't match your plan. And I let my gaze rest on Mom. You stop hiding behind helping. If you're worried, tell me. But don't pack my life into boxes again. Tears pooled in her eyes. We can do that, she whispered. I wasn't finished. Second, I want you both to find something for you, something that isn't about controlling me or anyone else. A dream you buried, a skill you set aside. Pick it up again. Show me you're more than just parents who worry. Dad's eyebrows lifted. At our age. Yes. Especially at your age, I said, a hint of a smile breaking through. Call it a challenge from your daughter, who apparently knows how to chase dreams. A quiet laugh slipped from Mom, watery but genuine. And last, I added, voice low, you have to accept that my success isn't a rebellion. It's just me. The words hung there like the final stroke of a painting. For the first time, neither of them looked defensive. Dad nodded slowly. We'll try, he said, and for the first time in years, I believed him. Mom reached for my hand across the polished marble countertop. We will. Their grip was tentative, but it was a beginning, one on my terms. The late afternoon sun spilled through my loft's tall windows, casting honey-colored streaks across the hardwood floor. A week had passed since the night my parents packed up my life without asking, and in that quiet glow I could almost hear the echo of our difficult conversation. Mom's voice, usually sharp when she worried, had softened the day after they left. She called just to say she'd scheduled an appointment with a therapist, something she once dismissed as not for people like us. Dad followed with an email so carefully written it felt like a truce. He admitted how afraid they'd been of my independence, how they thought controlling my next step would protect me. Reading his words, I picture him at the old oak desk back home, glasses sliding down his nose, pausing after every sentence. I watched the city lights flicker awake outside my window while those messages replayed in my mind. They weren't perfect apologies, but they were real. And for the first time in years, I sensed that the gap between us might narrow, not because I bent to fit their expectations, but because they finally stretched toward mine. On my kitchen counter sat the silver fountain pen that had started it all, the one my college advisor, Professor Harris, pressed into my palm the day I left home. "Write your own chapters, Charlotte," he'd said. Back then the words felt like a dare. Now they felt like a truth I had lived. I traced the smooth barrel with my thumb, remembering every late night of work, every silent victory I never shared. That pen wasn't just a gift. It was the quiet promise I kept to myself. Somewhere below, a cab horn blared, and a couple laughed as they hurried across the street. Life kept moving, messy, unpredictable, and beautiful. And I, Charlotte Morgan, finally felt aligned with it. I didn't need to announce my triumph or post a glittering update. The real power was in knowing I had built a life sturdy enough to stand on its own, and in watching the people who once doubted me learn how to stand beside me. I set the pen back down, smiled at the city, and whispered the line that had carried me this far. No one gets to pack up my life but me.